Hey everybody, and welcome to my Game of Thrones Season 8 Episode 3 prediction video. In this video, I go through scene by scene and predict what I think will happen in the last season of Game of Thrones. In the last episode, we had Jon tell Daenerys of his heritage, and it resulted in Varys colluding with Sansa to try and get Jon to be the king in the north. We also had a lot of people arrive at Winterfell. We had a lot of the Northern Lords, the Night's Watch, and Jaime Lannister. And he came with news regarding Cersei and her plan to hire the Golden Company, forcing Daenerys to plan and go south to attack. Bran has also had a calling to go to the Isle of Faces to become who he was meant to be. So he left with Arya, the Hound, and Sam to travel south to the God's Eye. But what nobody knows is that Sansa and Arya planned for her to go south with Bran to try and assassinate Cersei. And this episode starts at Winterfell. We see that civilians, women and children are being escorted out of Winterfell as they travel to White Harbor. The reason they're going to White Harbor is so they can be ported over to Dragonstone and be safe on an island free from the Night King. They decided to have Sansa, Davos, Gendry, Missandei, Gilly, Brienne, and Podrick go to White Harbor. Brienne insisted that she would stay with them to White Harbor to protect them on their voyage. Jon also tasked Davos to go with them so he can safely escort them from White Harbor to Dragonstone to use his smuggling abilities to hopefully avoid Euron Greyjoy. So as they leave, we see Sansa and Jon have an emotional send-off. So here Jon's going to tell Sansa that she is the Queen of Winterfell. And he tells her that he will stay in Winterfell until all the civilians and everyone is ready to escape through to White Harbor. And until there's enough distance between them and the Night King. And I think this scene is ironic because last season they gave Jon a very hard time for leaving the North because they needed the King of the North in the North. But now he's the one to stay with it, even though it's soon to fall. We then see Jon meet Daenerys outside of Winterfell, and she is with her dragons. And here she promises Jon that she will be okay and she'll deal with Cersei fast. And she will stop the Night King before he hurts any more of her children. And Jon keeps expressing how much he's worried for her and he wants her to be careful. But Daenerys is really worried about Jon facing off against the Night King. She wants Jon to come with her. But Jon refuses to leave until all of the North has been evacuated. So she ends up taking Jon to Rhaegal. She tells him that this dragon was named after his father, Rhaegar. And she thinks it's fitting that Rhaegal stays here with Jon in Winterfell to keep him safe. But with that, Daenerys makes Jon promise that he will return Rhaegal to her, safely. And Jon is naturally going to refuse, but Daenerys tells him that he has to. She tells him that Cersei has these scorpion ballistas, and if she's not controlling a dragon, one could easily be shot out of the sky. She tells him that Rhaegal needs a rider. So Jon ends up accepting Rhaegal, but not accepting the fact that he's a rider. So he ends up just leaving Rhaegal in the field with not much interaction. And then after that, Daenerys, Jorah, Tyrion, Varys, Grey Worm, and Jaime Lannister go to King's Landing. Jaime does want to stay north and fight, but he feels uneasy letting Daenerys go south to fight his sister. He still feels torn between sides, and even though he fought Cersei, he still loves her. So as they leave, Jon tells Daenerys that once all of his people leave for White Harbor, he will then bring his men and come south to help fight off King's Landing. And as they leave, we see the people who are remaining. There's Jon, Tormund, Beric Dondarrion, Dolorous Edd, and all of the Northern Lords. But then we go see Bran, Arya, the Hound, and Sam, and we see that they've arrived at the Isle of Faces. They take the boat across the water to the island, and as they walk through the weirwood trees, Bran says that they are not alone, and they end up coming across some children in the forest. And they tell Bran that they were waiting for him, and now he can take his place at the God's Eye. So we find Bran, the Hound, Arya, and Sam inside a cave under a network of weirwood trees. We see Bran touch the tree and immediately get sucked in. Arya is naturally very concerned and keeps asking what's happening to him. And the children are persistent and say that he's becoming who he is meant to be. So Arya then asks, what is Bran supposed to become? And the children say, everything. So here's where we get a glimpse of Bran's visions. He jumps through all points in history, including scenes that we've already seen in previous seasons. We see that Bran has more control than he ever has had before. The fact that he sees everything, he knows everything, and he controls everything. We first see a young Bran in Season 1 following the Three-Eyed Raven. We then see Bran standing over a dead Jon Snow's body before he was resurrected by Melisandre. We see Bran watching Daenerys burning with 3 dragon eggs. We also see him looking over the shoulder of Melisandre and Stannis, looking in the flames. And we also get a glimpse at Varys, just being mutilated and staring at a blue flame. And then we see Arya ask a question. She asks, how can Bran control everything? And then we go back to the flashbacks. We see that the 3-eyed raven that young Bran was following in Season 1 was actually Bran now, in the present time. We see that when Melisandre is chanting the words to resurrect Jon. We see Bran touch Jon's chest, and his eyes turn white, and Jon breathes his first breath of air again. We see him look at the dragon eggs as Daenerys is burning. His eyes go white, and the dragons start to hatch. We see him warg into the eyes of Melisandre and Stannis, as he projects the future into the flames that they look at. So what we realize here is that Bran is not only the 3-eyed raven, he's every god, every myth that has ever existed. And every vision that Melisandre has ever seen is Bran telling her to look out for his brother, and who Azor Ahai is, and who can defeat the Night King. But then the visions go awry, and we see Bran standing across from the Night King, like in Season 6. And he sees the Night King closing in on Winterfell, with his giant army. And as Bran is staring at the Night King, his eyes turn white and he wargs once again. And here we flash to Melisandre and Kinvara in Volantis. We see their eyes flash white and back to normal as they stare into the flames. And they see everything that Bran has just been through. They see Daenerys rising with dragons. They see Jon's resurrection. And they finally end by seeing the White Walkers invading Winterfell. So here we see Melisandre tell Kinvara that there is another prince who was promised. She tells Kinvara that it's Jon Snow. So here Kinvara says that she will summon the Fiery Hand and her most eloquent priests to go to Westeros to help aid Daenerys and Jon Snow in their victory. So Bran is now essentially God in the God's Eye. He can travel and change the past in seconds. He is so interconnected to everything. And in this moment, he knows that he has to rescue his brother Jon, because he's needed for the long night. So then we go to Jon and Tormund at Winterfell at nighttime. Tormund thanks Jon for taking care of his people. And during this conversation, they are interrupted by 3 horns. And this horn naturally means White Walkers, so everyone starts to panic. Jon and Tormund run through the castle walls to try and find who's blowing the horn. And when Jon finds him, he grabs him and looks at him, and his eyes are white, and he's repeating, "They are here." And we go to Bran, who's also warging, saying, "They are here." So it's clear that Bran is warging into soldiers to warn Jon that the White Walkers are indeed here. And I believe that this scene in Winterfell between the Night King and Jon, it's going to jump back and forth between Bran interacting at the Isle of Faces to Jon fighting off the threat in Winterfell. I think Jon is going to run around the towers trying to prepare everyone for battle. He's going to run into all the lords of Winterfell, including Lord Glover and Umber, to try and gather their men to prepare for the White Walkers. He has them gather their force at the gates of Winterfell. And he finds Lady Mormont and he tells her to secure all the remaining civilians in the castle at the Great Hall. Jon then goes back to the castle walls and watches the dead running towards Winterfell. Jon starts yelling at his men to get ready for battle until he hears a piercing dragon roar. Watches the dead run. And before Jon can absorb what's happening, he quickly dodges blue flame that runs a stripe across Winterfell, setting it on fire. As Winterfell burns, the Whites climb the castle walls and Jon tries to form a plan. He puts Dolorous Edd in charge of the defense, and to try and help some of Daenerys' Dothraki who are fighting the Whites outside of the castle. But then Jon tells Tormund and Beric Dondarrion to come with him to rescue the civilians who are trapped in the Great Hall. So we see Jon, Beric, Tormund, and Ghost fight their way into the burning castle. They get inside and fight a couple of odd Whites and make their way into the Great Hall. So Tormund and Jon force open the door and they realize there are a couple White Walkers inside executing civilians. One of the first people they see dead on the floor is Lyanna Mormont. It's clear that even with her young age, she stood for her people. So Jon immediately jumps in and starts fighting the White Walkers with Tormund, Beric, and Ghost. Jon ends up killing the first White Walker and Tormund is left fending off the second one. Tormund ends up yelling at Jon to get them out and he'll hold off the White Walker. And in this time, Jon manages to get all of his people to escape, while he watches Tormund barely kill the White Walker. But Jon can't rescue Tormund because there's flames in between them. So Jon said his goodbyes to Tormund and left him to burn in the Great Hall. At this point, Bran is now convinced Jon will be killed. The odds are stacked against them. There's nothing they can do. In desperation, Bran jumps back in time 8,000 years earlier to try and find answers, and Bran finds himself at the Isle of Faces. And he sees that he's not in a battle, he's in an exchange. He sees the Night King and his army, and they're face to face with the Children of the Forest and the Andals. And he sees the Andals and the children look worn and defeated. But he then sees a man in shackles holding a baby, delivered to the Night King by the children. And he takes this man and his child and leaves peacefully. So Bran comes out of it in shock, talking to the children, telling them that the long night is a lie, that they just traded a few lives for peace. And the children tells Bran that the Night King is unstoppable. He can only be contained, and that the Night King needs humanity to ensure his growth and stability of his people. So when the time comes, a sacrifice is necessary. And the children tell Bran that they've reached that point in history again. And they tell Bran that Jon needs to be taken by the Night King for the good of the people. His sacrifice will save humanity. And during this we see Jon finally make it outside to the grounds of the Weirwood Tree. Beric is barely holding off the incoming whites to protect the civilians, and Jon runs in to fight them off. They end up getting overrun by whites, and Jon and Beric are ambushed and held down. The civilians that they tried to save are being killed by the White Walkers. And Jon is grabbed by 6 whites and dragged to the trunk of the Weirwood Tree. And as Jon and Beric fight, everything ends up dying down. They watch the Night King arrive on the back of Viserion and dismount. As he gets off of Viserion, White Walkers circle the Weirwood Tree, almost like a ceremony. One of the White Walkers gives the Night King a blade of dragon glass. And the Night King starts to pursue Jon, holding the blade of dragonglass to stab him in the heart. Bran watches this happen, and Arya ends up yelling at him to do something, with Arya yelling in his ear while he's warging, and the children yelling at him to leave Jon, let him be sacrificed. Bran chooses to try and do anything he can to save his brother. So we see Bran go back in time to the moment he watched the Night King be created. The moment where Leaf plunged the dragonglass into the heart of the Andal. But just before he's stabbed by the dragonglass by Leaf, Bran wargs into the Andal. And as Bran is warged into him, dragonglass plunges into his heart, and the Night King is born. And this creates an immense bond between the Night King and Bran, because the Night King is Bran Stark's consciousness. They've been fused together when Bran was warging into the Night King when he was created. So we see as the Night King pursues Jon with the blade of dragonglass, he drops to his knees, and the connection between him and the whites stutter for a minute. This gives Jon enough time to break free. And when the Night King starts to come to, Beric breaks free, tells Jon to run, and tackles the Night King to hold him back. As the Night King comes back and his whites come back, Beric is killed, and Jon runs from the horde that is chasing him. Jon ends up making some distance but trips and falls. As he watches all the whites pursue him, he just closes his eyes, just like Daenerys. But in his moment of need, Rhaegal comes to his rescue, and Jon jumps on the back of Rhaegal and escapes Winterfell, leaving behind all of the Northern Lords, Dolorous Edd in the Night's Watch, Beric Dondarrion, Tormund, and his dog Ghost. But at the Isle of Faces, the children know that Bran did something wrong, and they start to panic and they try and attack Bran. Out of defense, Arya and the Hound start attacking the children and a fight breaks out. Bran is unresponsive. He's in a coma, warg type state. So Arya orders Sam to grab Bran and run. And Arya and the Hound try and fight them off as they try and get back on the boat. And as they make their way to the boat, they're overrun by the children. And the Hound throws Arya on the boat and pushes them away. And he fights off the children and ends up sacrificing himself to save the others. And most importantly, Arya. On the boat, Arya is emotional, but she's trying to wake up Bran. but Bran isn't waking up. But we see through Bran's eyes, and what we realize is that it's the Night King. And the Night King is hearing the echoes of Arya Stark. We see the Night King raise all the dead that have died at Winterfell, including Ghost, and we see him go up to the weirwood tree, put his hand to the ground, and destroy it. And that is it for my Game of Thrones Season 8 Episode 3 prediction video. Please let me know what you think in the comment section down below. There is a lot more revelations to come in upcoming episodes. I hope you enjoyed, but until next time, I'll see you guys later.